Hello everybody, welcome to Who Arted. In today's video, I'm going to be building my Halloween costume, just in time, actually. But here we go. So this here is foam, obviously. This is like a mattress topper foam, furniture foam, and any kind of squishy foam. It doesn't really matter, whatever you can get for free, preferred. And contact cement there. It's actually great for gluing these together. I'm spreading it there on both sides of that seam to stick it together. You'll see me use various different things to stick it together. Spray glue works, if only temporarily. Stitching with yarn, I do a lot of that. Any of that kind of glue really can work however you want to do it. And you see me stitching with yarn, at least at the ends of where the glue is, to keep it from pulling apart. And you can stitch that whole seam all the way up with yarn too. It's a little time consuming, but it works great, nice and strong. And this is all going to be covered with plastic and skin and whatnot, so the stitching doesn't have to be pretty, nor does it glue. Now I'm gluing pieces of muscles basically onto that upper arm. I'm just trimming out some foam with some scissors and spray gluing it right onto that upper arm. And you can use a thicker piece of foam and spend more time trimming to make it a little more organic, shape it more like muscles or whatever you want. I'm doing it kind of quick here. It doesn't really matter how accurate it is, being a giant monster costume anyway. And I'm just gluing some strips on there again to act as muscle basically underneath what's going to be the skin, and which is going to cover a lot of the seams and the edges there that you see. And you can spend as much time as you want smoothing that out and rounding it out. There's that thicker piece I was talking about. And that is going to be a pack muscle. Lots of trimmings, and the floor is covered in those little bits of foam, which will actually come in handy later. A couple layers of thinner foam will work just as well if you don't have any of that thicker stuff or can't get any of it. And there's a hot glue gun, my favorite tool of them all. This is going to be a rib, a couple of ribs there. Just kind of cutting out a strip and rounding it out a bit with the scissors. Spray gluing those on to hold them temporarily. Making a mask now. Kind of make it somewhat round. It's going to have hair and whatnot on it, so it doesn't have to be perfect. None of this does really. That is a wire coat hanger I am shoving in to bend it so it'll hold its bend. That's like a gigantic bottom jaw. Just gluing kind of a face on there, cut out some eye holes. Being very general here, most of the detail comes in the end when we paint it. Got a bottom lip going there. Looks like it needs to come down further. Cut another piece out. Kind of sculpting it really. Choosing to stitch all the way up instead of gluing that time. It's a little less of a mess when you're stitching. And now I'm going to make shoes for it, and that's EVA foam, or that floor mat foam, the stuff that you get to make a home gym out of your garage or whatnot. That stuff looks great. Gluing a few layers together there. The hot glue gun is, the heat gun is kind of cheating there, speeds up the glue drying process. Got 2 feet, more of that EVA foam. There I'm just clamping it together so the glue can dry. Nice and solid. These are basically going to be giant clown-sized Chuck Taylors. More of the mattress topper foam to make the shoe with. And that is another piece of EVA foam, very thin piece, or sometimes called craft foam. You can get pieces of it at your craft store. Good for small details, things like that, and also tons of giant shoes. Little eye hoops from the craft store again. You just smack them on with a hammer. So the shoe will actually lace up just like a real shoe. Plasti dip. That is basically a primer for the foam. It's basically just a flexible primer. And you'll need to spray that onto foam if you're going to paint foam directly. Otherwise your paint will just soak right into the foam. And it's as if you never painted it. Putting more of those eyelets in. And a rope from the hardware store. Sharpie paint pens, you know, I love those. Time for the skin. This is where it starts to actually look like something. So that is painter's plastic. You can get really cheap at Home Depot. The plastic you lay on the floor when you paint your house. Now this is the cheap, thin stuff, which actually works great. The thicker plastics aren't going to shrink as well as the thin, cheap stuff. And you see me just spray gluing it, sticking it on, and then hitting it with that heat gun to shrink it down and stick it to the foam. You can use a trash bag or anything like that, grocery bags. That thin painter's plastic is cheap though, and it works great. Tons of it. Now here comes the good part, the skin. Now that is a caulking of a caulking gun, and that is paintable caulking, and that's really what matters there, is that it says paintable somewhere on there. This is like a water-based, less toxic one that you can get. If you have a silicone-based one, you're going to have trouble painting that. More painter's plastic for the torso. Spray glue, stick it on, and shrink it with the heat gun. And if I get the heat gun too close, you can see I burnt or melted some holes through the plastic, which is actually great. This is a zombie monster, so having holes in the skin is perfect. Also, that gives me a place to stick that caulking through the plastic and through the holes in the plastic to the foam, which actually helps adhere the plastic to the foam because that spray glue will only last so long. And now I am in those holes. I am scooping up chunks of foam scraps that I've cut and fallen onto the floor, squirting the caulking onto that, squishing them into those holes, and that kind of acts as like rotten guts, zombie guts, inside those holes there. So it doesn't just look like bare foam and there's a hole in it. The duct tape is just holding the plastic for me temporarily. It doesn't stick very well with foam. So there's a handful of bits and scraps from the floor, spray glued on, and then plastic over it. I rip the hole in the plastic, and then start smearing the caulking all over it, and smear it right into that opening where all those foam bits are. You see that stitching line, that yarn stitching, that actually shows through it in the end. It's hard to notice, but it is there. That's where gluing actually works better than the stitching because it hides that. The stitching can look okay if it's a monster anyway, or you can cover that with more of the caulking. Shrinking more plastic down on the arm. And the gap where the elbow is, I basically filled it with more of those foam bits, so it looks like the elbow is cut open. Just gluing straight foam teeth, little squares of foam right into the mouth. I'm not going to cover those in plastic or anything, just leave the foam on that. For the hands, I use this big thick piece because I have it. That can be cut with just the 1 inch or 2 inch thinner stuff, and just cut 2 of them glued together, and now it's a thicker one. X-Acto knife cutting through that is a little bit tedious. If you had a bandsaw, that would be quick and easy, which I don't. And then trim away until it's kind of round. So you can glue those fingers closed or open into any kind of hand position you want. You can also shove, because my hand isn't actually going in that, and the fingers are going in the very bottom of that hand. You can shove wire down the fingers, coat hanger wire into the fingers, and then make it posable, bendable. Now for the airbrushing, and this is just water-based airbrush paint and a little bit of light brown. And there I have like a dark red, and then I'm just spraying heavily and then wiping off with a wet rag, and that fills in the little cracks and seams and whatnot that I created when I was spreading that caulking on by hand, and that gives it a really gruesome look. And then red right into those holes. Those are the holes that I burnt through with my heat gun when I was putting the plastic on. Spray some nice red, bright red in there, and then back in some really dark red. Which doesn't have to be airbrushed either. You can spray can that in there if that's all you got. That's fine. Airbrushes are a little easier and more fun, and cheap ones work almost as good as expensive ones as well. And a little bit of black up the contrast a bit. Now for the hair. This is just a cheap dollar store wig, or Halloween store wig. Cut off a piece, and I squirt hot glue onto a tongue depressor or a popsicle stick, and then smear that right on. Just kind of press the hair on and swipe up, and start at the bottom and work your way up. And as thick or as thin as you like. Now I'm shoving a coat hanger into that tongue, glue it on the back. That allows me to bend the tongue so it holds its position. These are cuffs for the hands, or wrists rather. I'm going to glue some plastic chain, Halloween store plastic chain to it as if it broke free. More of that craft foam in larger sheets. It's really thin stuff. So you don't want to rely on it structurally. I put suspenders on these pants that's going to hold those up. They tend to stay up on me anyway because I'm big and kind of tight, but a smaller person can wear those and the suspenders and hold them up. The torso is going to have pants on it as well, just the top. They're all going to be very shredded because it's a zombie, and that's going to hang over the actual pants to hide the fact that they're not actual pants. And that's white foam I just spray painted in blue. The top is going to remain white. I'm just hot gluing it right to the torso right there. Shredding it up like a shredded up t-shirt. I'm actually gluing it to the torso in a few places so it stays put. Some on the back. And this is just acrylic paint with a wet rag, and I'm just smearing brown and black all over that to make it look dirty. Just crawled out of the grave. And there you have it. There's my fun foam zombie monster costume. The kids love it. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe.